Hi, and welcome back to my channel, Pathways to God and Significance. My name is Mike. I've been away for a couple of weeks, had to look after a couple of things, but I think we'll be back on track again for these weekly videos. And these videos are based on messages that I would have given at my church recently, and I'm changing the pace a little bit. I'm calling them interactive sermons. And by interactive, I mean I'm going to keep the messages a bit short and at the end pose a few questions for you to consider or to talk about with family or with friends or with a study group that you might have. So hope you enjoy them, this first interactive sermon, and here we go. This one is called It's Simple. Tell the Truth. Now, truth can seem hard to find. The label on a more expensive brand of orange juice says not from concentrate. Now, this gives the impression that the juice is pretty much, squeezed fresh out of the orange into the carton. A pretty healthy drink. Not so, says a journalist who claims to have investigated how the company makes its juice. That juice is heated, all the chemicals that give it its taste are removed and are made stronger, and then later in the processing, those taste-making chemicals, now adjusted for better taste, are put back into the juice. So maybe that brand of orange juice is not quite as healthy as the manufacturer wants you or I to believe. Or take some of the youth who I meet who are in custody. I see youth in custody every weekend. One of them was accused of stealing a pickup truck. Oh, I said, what happened? The youth told me this. He said, my friend picked me up in this new truck. How was I to know he stole it? I was in the passenger seat. And then we got pulled over and the cops arrested me for the theft of the truck. Well, around this time, I'd heard a few stories from youth who told me that they just happened to be passengers in the vehicles that they were accused of stealing. So I asked this youth, are you sure that your friend picked you up after he stole the pickup? And are you sure that you were sober and that it was your friend and not you who was driving? Sometimes truth is hard to find. Manufacturers try to make their products look just a little bit better than they might be, and people who do things wrong cover their tracks, invent stories, tell lies to get off the hook. And there are definitely times, maybe even many times, when we're not quite sure exactly what to believe. Sometimes even we don't want to know the truth. It might be too painful for us, or it might put us in a bad light. So often we avoid it. Someone once said, even though truth is scarce, the supply always exceeds the demand. In other words, sometimes we just don't want to know. And I believe it was former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill who said, people stumble over the truth from time to time, but most pick themselves up and hurry off as if nothing has happened. So sometimes we see the truth, but we avoid dealing with it. It's just too difficult, and so we move on as if nothing has happened. So I want to begin with thinking about Moses, Jesus, and James on telling the truth. Moses, Jesus, and James on truth-telling. So first, Moses. Now, in the earliest stories of the Bible, there's a lot of lying and scheming. Laban tricked his nephew into marrying the wrong girl. Jacob swindled his brother out of his inheritance. The brothers of Joseph deceive their father for many years. Interestingly, these are God's people. But anyway, there it is. They're not exactly model citizens. Sneaky people, but God works through them regardless. But then along comes Moses. He's by far the largest and most important figure in the Old Testament. There's no one greater than Moses in the history of the people of God until Jesus. Moses himself was not known to be a liar, but he did commit what we would call an act of manslaughter. Anyway, I want to bring up Moses because he presented God's people with the 10 Commandments and quite a few other commands. And one of the 10 Commandments reads this way: "You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor." Now, if we pay careful attention to the wording of that command, we can see that probably what it has in mind is a court hearing or a trial. Now, trials in those early days of the Jewish people did not take place in a courthouse like we have in the Western world, with a jail next door and plenty of law enforcement personnel nearby. I think that disputes between neighbors were handled by something like a circle of village elders who would hear cases that their neighbors brought against each other. So the command, don't make false accusations against your neighbor, this law said, and don't give false testimony against someone if you are asked to testify. Now, does this mean that you could tell lies anywhere else except for in court? That's where you had to be truthful. Well, of course not. All through the Old Testament, deceptions, moving property markers at night, dishonesty, using false weights and measures in the marketplace, all such dishonest and lying ways are condemned. In other words, be truthful, always. In court, of course, but everywhere. Now, let's go to Jesus. I'm going to leave Moses behind now and go to Jesus. Jesus is fully on board with this emphasis on being trustworthy. He teaches his followers to be truthful. And I'm going to read this passage from Matthew chapter 5. Jesus says, "Again, you've heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you, don't swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say simply is yes or no. Anything else beyond this comes from the evil one." Now, when Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said," he's referring to the religious authorities of his day, the official teachers of the Jewish law. These were men not to be trifled with. They took their job seriously, and many people took them seriously. So when Jesus says, "You've heard that it was said, but I tell you," we know that he's going to oppose what those teachers thought, and this will be a significant thing that Jesus does, because these were serious teachings, taught by serious people, serious about the Jewish life. So in these verses, what official teachings does Jesus oppose? What does he object to? I think it's this. The religious leaders taught that there were some oaths you had to keep and some that you could maybe get out of. It was like they had a hierarchy of oaths. Some were super important and others less so. If you had made an oath in the name of God himself, well, you better keep that one. But if you made a promise only by the temple, or swearing on the earth, or by heaven, or on your own head, well, you could regard those oaths as a little less important, ones that you could get out of. And this was something, of course, that was a relief to people who had spoken carelessly and had difficulty keeping those oaths. But no doubt it left some people in the lurch. He promised me, $50 for my cow, and now he doesn't have to pay, kind of thing. In Jesus' mind, this kind of hierarchy of oaths is all messed up. Don't bother, he would say, swearing on a stack of Old Testaments, or your mother's grave, or the city of Jerusalem, or by your head. And if you think that by swearing by heaven, you're not actually involving God, just a little aside, there was another one of the 10 Commandments: you shall not take the name of the Lord. You must not use God's name carelessly. You must not take it in vain. And so, the idea was that, you might not want to use the actual word God or the name of God, but maybe just something very close to it, heaven or the whole creation, the earth, that kind of thing. But Jesus says, don't think that just by swearing by heaven or something close to God, you're not actually involving God, because, well, think again. God created the earth. It's in that sense His. It's holy, and heaven is where He lives, and that kind of thing. And so don't bother using those kind of secondary oaths. And he says, if you want to swear by your head, well, just remember that whether you keep your head or lose it is not always up to you. Death comes surprisingly sometimes, and you don't have control even over the color of one of the hairs on your head. I mean, then as now, you could dye your hair, but the roots will always give you away. All this swearing by this or that is of no value, Jesus taught. All this oath taking by this or that thing, and developing religious teachings based on different kinds of oaths that people could make was in the end legalistic and a waste of time. Just be consistently truthful and trustworthy all the time. Be careful what you promise. Speak slowly. And if you say you're going to do something, just do it. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything else, Jesus says, comes from the evil one. By that, I think he means Satan. And could we elaborate on that a little bit? I think so. Satan is the master of trickery, lies, deception, smoke and mirrors. Stay away from such evils. If you're going to follow me, Jesus teaches us, you must stay away from all such tricks and nonsense. Jesus says to us, you be truthful, trustworthy, consistent, and reliable. That's what that's what I intend for. That's what I intend for my people. That's what I demand from my people. It's simple. It's simple. Be trustworthy all the time in every situation. Now, I promised that we'd look at James a bit. James, it's a small book in the Bible right near the end, chapter 5, verse 12. About 15 years after Jesus, James died around the year 44. So one of the New Testament writers, James teaches on being truthful, using words that are almost identical to what Jesus taught. And this James is probably a half-brother of Jesus. But whether or not he is, he wrote this. Above all, James says, above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven, not by earth, not by anything else. Let your yes be yes and your no be no, or you be condemned. Clearly, James intends to stick as close as possible to the actual words of Jesus, and he's validating, of course, reinforcing what Jesus taught. Be trustworthy everywhere, all the time. So, a couple questions that you might want to think about or talk about with friends or a study group. Number one, what passages in the book of Proverbs, what passages in the Bible book of Proverbs encourage truthfulness? Second question, are there times when you have felt that people were not being truthful with you? Family, online fraud, times when people have not been truthful with you. Third, are there times when you find it hard to be truthful? And how do you deal with that? And lastly, fourth question, what are the benefits of being truthful? Benefits in your relationship with God, benefits in relationships among family, among friends, and what are the benefits of being truthful in the workplace, and even in terms of your own prosperity? Well, thanks so much for being part of Pathways this week. I hope these questions are helpful, and don't forget to subscribe, to like. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.